Cet après-midi, on va continuer. On a encore une belle série de conférences à vous présenter. Et on va commencer tout de suite par Boasen, directeur d'innovation chez LRDG, qui va nous parler en fait de sa conférence Making Brain Function Actionable for Industry. Mesdames et messieurs, grand applaudissement pour Jared.
The big green button. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jared. It's great to be here. I am actually a cognitive neuroscientist by training, and I was a postdoctoral fellow at the Tech Trois Lab. One of my first projects was AXON. And after it started to gain some momentum, I ended up making the jump over to industry. And as Pierre-Marc Léger likes to tease me, I went over to the dark side of the force. Excuse me, I'm also fighting a cold, but I'll do my best to stick with you. But no, seriously, it's been a really exciting journey, and I'm so happy to be here to get to share with you about the journey of AXON, the research that we've done with it, and where it is today. To begin, I couldn't help but notice in the morning that there were a lot of coffee drinkers out there. Yeah, a lot of drug addicts like me. And I think a lot of you know that that feeling when you miss your cup of coffee in the morning, you know. But for those of you that don't drink coffee, I'll have a metaphor for you. Perhaps you know that feeling when it snows at night and you got the snow plows going along and keeping you up all night long. You sleep terribly. And for the rest of you, maybe you know what it's like when you eat too much at the free lunch buffet and you come back into an auditorium and it's kind of dim. Your brain kind of gets a little bit dull. On the other hand, I think a lot of us know that when you have that caffeine or you have a nice nap or maybe you have a bit of exercise, that your brain becomes sharp. And I think all of us have a sense that depending on whether our brains are sharp or dull, that it has an effect on how we perform, whether it's in our everyday life or at work. So basically, I'm saying that there's this cause and effect relationship with brain function at the center, where what we do affects how our brains function, and how our brains function affects how we do things. So it naturally follows that if you can measure brain function, then we can explain the effect of this one, and we can potentially predict the outcome of that one. And with that in mind, I would like to invite you to imagine, what if industry had a way to measure brain function? What would that be like? Well, I think that it would unlock three very important things. Number one, it would allow us to measure the real cognitive impact of products, services, and interventions. Not just how people say something makes them feel, but how their brain function actually changes as a result of these things. Number two, we could predict readiness and performance. So think about knowing who is ready for a task, who is right for a role, who's ready for training, who's ready to test a system. And number three, and here I think about Kate's opening keynote a lot when she talked about cognitive participants. We could control for human variability in research and innovation. Think how much better our work could be if we could target the right people from the beginning, how much more added value we would get. Or if even after doing a study, because we've measured brain function, now we can control our data analyses. So we get better data, we get clearer comparisons, and ultimately we are able to make better decisions. At LRDG, we thought, having a tool like that would be pretty cool. So about 6 years ago, we went on the hunt to try and find one. Now, as we did that, we thought to ourselves, if a tool for measuring brain function was really going to be useful industrially, it would need to meet a few key criteria. First of all, it would need to be quick. After all, on the dark side of the force, time is money, as they say. It would also need to be portable, mobile, and it would need to be simple and accessible so that anyone, anywhere could use it anytime they wanted. Now, a tool like this actually already exists for physiology. It's called a thermometer. Chances are you probably all have one at home. Now, the thing about a thermometer is it is not diagnostic. And what I mean by that is nobody takes their temperature and goes, oh, gee, 36.9, I must have cancer. Or 38.2, I think I got a tapeworm. Diagnosticity is not the point of a thermometer, but it is accurate at what it measures, and we trust the measurement. And when a thermometer indicates to you that your temperature has deviated from what's normal for you, well, that feedback is important, and we understand it, and it helps us take action. Well, we wanted something that embodied the qualities of a thermometer, but for the brain. Now, chances are you don't have one of those at home or at the office. And in fact, we couldn't find one anywhere. It seems that while industry has many tools to measure the body and many tools to measure behavior, there seem to be no simple tools to measure brain function. So LRDG decided to make one, a cognitive function monitoring system that we call AXON. When going about doing this, we decided to build AXON on something called the trail making test, or the TMT. This is a classic cognitive assessment. It's used worldwide today, and it has a long-standing scientific history dating back to the 1940s. At its core, it measures the ability of someone to perform a task which depends on attention, visual and motor processing speed, and something called executive control, which is basically the extent to which someone can act with intent and refrain from impulsiveness. The test itself takes 2 minutes, and it has 2 parts, A and B. So what we did is we used this scientific foundation, and upon it, we created a modern operational tool. On the front end, we now have a multilingual, self-administrable iPad application, which is designed for rapid and repeatable use. And on the back end, we've developed algorithms that permit that repeated testing, allow us to detect changes in performance patterns, and support user-level interpretation of results. From the very beginning of AXON's development, we have been partnering with Tech3 Lab. And we started, as most partners do, with numerous rounds of user testing. to make our system intuitive and practical. You'll notice the dates of this just happened to be right in the middle of the pandemic. And I can tell you that it is not an easy thing to do user tests when you can't even see people face to face or get them to come to the lab. Kudos to Tech3 for helping make this happen. But after we completed this, we set our sights on validation. And we started with a small-scale study. And this has now been published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research, or JMIR. And in that study, we showed that AXON aligns with the original TMT. And for us, this was a crucial milestone because it now allows us to tap into that scientific knowledge which has been accumulated from longstanding research on the TMT. Secondly, we also were able to show that AXON B performance, better AXON B performance, was associated with better performance on computer tasks. And this was also a very interesting and important finding for us because it was a step towards demonstrating a valid predictive tool. But we needed to know if this relationship would hold at a broader industrial scale. So through the Alliance program, we embarked on much larger scale validation. Through a multi-year research program, this is a 5-year program, and it involves multiple research partners and 225 participants in our current sample size for the most recent study. And this is across multiple sectors. So transportation, banking, e-learning, multimedia entertainment, and industrial task types like multi-step transactions, online training, language learning, information search, reading. And what we found is that AXON B scores predicted task success. So this was a corroboration of our initial validation study. But it wasn't just that they predicted success, it's that they did so in general, regardless of the industrial context and regardless of what kind of task someone was doing. And moreover, we were even able to model the probability of success as a function of AXON B score. This was really cool because essentially what it means is that using the AXON B score, we can predict how likely someone will succeed. So thanks to this research, AXON has been able to gain the credibility it needed to move from the lab and now out into the field. And there we've been able to now engage with all kinds of partners across many different sectors, and all of them are observing the same initial problem that we observed, and they have the same need and interest to have a simple, objective, practical tool to measure brain function. And now we are partnering, for example, in Minnesota with a company called Vestibular Training Services. And here, AXON is being used before and after therapy to help quantify the effects of that therapy and demonstrate value back to the patients. We're talking athletes, concussed patients, older adults. They get immediate feedback on what this therapy did for them. Here in Montreal, we're working with Olympic gold medalist Bruni Surin. And AXON's being used with young athletes at his gym. And it's giving them real-time feedback on their brain's functional state during their training. So it's helping to educate them on core athletic concepts like focus, fatigue, and understanding limits. Because the test is so short, it doesn't interrupt training time. So they're able to do this repeatedly. And something that they wouldn't have really understood or been conscious about now that feedback is there, it's visible, and they see it. And then they can learn how to tune their own mind and their own focus and make their training more effective. We're also partnering with another Canadian startup called Brainovation, where AXON's positioned to become a core measurement modality in modular neural lounges. And these are going to be installed in spas, hotels, gyms, and other wellness facilities all across North America. And this is only the beginning for us. So we're really excited about this. And again, it's thanks to this whole journey and this relationship that we've been able to achieve and the results we've been able to achieve through research. And our mission now with AXON has become not just to make another assessment tool. We really want AXON to make brain function actionable for industry. And that means for screening, for monitoring, for research control, for helping to show the value of products and services and interventions. Basically, we would like AXON to become for brain function what the thermometer became for temperature. And that is a simple, trusted tool that helps turn an invisible state into something measurable and actionable. AXON wouldn't be where it is today without research, entrepreneurship, and partnership. And so I'd like to take a moment to just acknowledge the amazing work of the research team at Tech3 Lab, the Froelich family, Julius and Jason for funding and driving this project, my colleagues, Clyde and Marika. Startups are not easy. And all of our industrial partners, thank you for helping to turn an idea into something that's now being used in the real world. Now, I didn't take all the time today. I was hoping that we could have some questions and answers. I'm assuming that there are some UX people in the crowd. Awesome. Are you guys interested in brain function measurement? If so, I'd love to hear anything you have to say or questions that you might have to ask. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Jared. Est-ce qu'on a des questions dans la salle? En anglais ou en français? Oui, plusieurs questions. Super. Commencez ici.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Throughout the conversation, one topic kept on coming up for me as a question. It's really nice to consider the effects of measuring brain function for industry, but I wonder how much of it are we taking into account on if we're measuring brain function, what are the implications in terms of ethics? So the value of a human mind, different minds develop in different ways. There's different ways to measure different aspects and the intricacies of the human mind. And if we're using this as a means of, for example, assessing productivity of, let's say, an individual who's in the industry, or screening, for example, individuals who are going to be part of a study or part of an organization, do you have any vision of how the long-term implications of a tool like this would be?
Wow, that's a great question. Hit me hard right off the bat. I'll start my answer by flipping the question around, actually. How many of you in industry today are already measuring things about your employees? Anybody? You are. Chances are there are already rules in place for how to conduct measurements on employees ethically. And my first advice to you is that you got to think about this as just another one of those measurements. So whatever ethical precautions you are taking with your existing measurements, you would have to do so with brain function as well, for sure. I can also say that we're aware that some people don't want to share their brains. Maybe they're willing to share something else about themselves, but that's kind of private. And I think one of the reasons why it's so private is because up until now, this is not an accessible measurement for most of the public. Like I said, nobody has a tool to just measure their brain function at home. It's not a ubiquitous thing. So when we designed this, we made sure that you could go two different directions. You can either make this a very personal account that you know who the person is behind the data, or you can anonymize it. And in that way, the person using it, the end user, can still get the feedback that they need. They still get the history of data that's so informative to them, but their employer or whomever else doesn't know who they are. At the same time, if an employer wants to be able to see that information on aggregate, well, let's say you have a whole bunch of rules and you need to understand the dynamics of some sort of environmental change to that workplace, for example. You could at least look at that on the whole and see how your decisions are affecting your employees en masse. I hope that somewhat answers your question. Yeah.
Jared, I have a question. Jared, I'm here.
Oh,
This gentleman.
I'm being blinded.
You mentioned the things about screening, and we have a lot of people in the room doing UX research.
Okay.
So how do you see AXON, how can you use it in UX research in terms of maybe cognitive readiness, or can you?
Sure, thank you for inviting me to elaborate on this very important point. So there are two ways that I envision you could use this in UX research. The first way is before your participants even arrive. So as a pre-screening tool, if you will. Now, this doesn't work for every situation. At the university, for example, we don't always have access to the participants beforehand. But in industrial research, oftentimes we do. And sometimes we'll go through a recruiting agency. Do any of you use recruiting agencies for your studies? Some of you do, right. And often one of the steps that an agency like that will do is they will pre-screen. That's part of their job, actually, is to help find the right people for you to be in your study. So this is one very important way that we think it could be used. The other way, and is the way that we're using it actually at Tech 3 Lab, and that is whether you have the chance to pre-screen or not, maybe you still do, but you can also use it during the study itself. Because it's so short, it's very practical and it's not intrusive to introduce into most UX studies. I think the timeline for many is maybe an hour max. And of course, there are all kinds of things. You have the interviews, you have the informed consent. There are a lot of things that are vying for that time slot. But if AXON only takes 2 minutes, it hardly costs you anything. And what you gain, I think, is very valuable in the end. So that's my answer.
Merci Jared. Est-ce qu'on a d'autres questions? Oui, ici. On peut avoir un micro. Pour madame au milieu, Julie, si tu peux passer un micro.
Hi, Jared.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I loved every bit of it. My name is Christine. I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm also a UX designer. And I see so many values in what you just presented in terms of, you talked about screening, but also the possibility of maybe providing diagnostic in terms of healthcare. So I do see that a lot of, I've worked with healthcare companies, and the process is so heavy, how can I say that? It's a very lengthy process. And these type of technology could maybe help, combined with research, help the health and care industry as well. So how do you see the screening process being implicated and with healthcare industry, and if you see this possibility?
Thank you. So that's a great question. And this avenue for AXON's use case was one we recognized from the very beginning. I think I speak for the president of LRDG in saying that we would love AXON to have an impact on health. We would love that. But I can also say this is one of the hardest roads to go down. There are so many barriers, rules, red tape. So from a business standpoint, for us right now, although we see so much potential, we also see difficulty in getting started. So it's not our first priority, but I do recognize that this is a major gap in healthcare right now. And there are other companies trying to fill this, but I do agree that AXON could be used there. And if the right people were to come to us and say, screw the red tape, we'd like to use that, we'd be delighted.
Merci Jared. Est-ce qu'on a une dernière question? On aura le temps pour une dernière. Par ici. Une question.
Thanks a lot. It was really interesting. My name is Félix Fauché. I'm a professor in UX design at École des Technologies Supérieures, but mostly I'm a ADHD and also HP, so I'm really sensible to stuff you're talking about. Quick two questions I have is, first, do you need to calibrate it? You mentioned it's only a 2-minute process, but I guess people are different, and I don't know, you get a standard, like a measure to be able to compare it to. And the other thing is, since I feel that brain function, at least in my case, is very variable, depending if I've got my medication, coffee, etc., if I've slept well, if my kids woke me 10 times during the night.
Yep.
So I'm wondering how stable that is during a day, and is it variable for different individuals?
Yep. Thank you. Those are excellent questions. To the first question, how do we understand the meaning of the initial measurement? You know, what is that? The normal. And what we did here is, you know, like with a thermometer, I think most of you have used it so many times in your life, you get used to what temperature represents you when you don't have a fever. And it's not the same for everyone, actually. It's the same thing with cognitive function here, as I'm talking about with AXON. It's not going to be the same for everyone. And you also need to use it multiple times so that you can understand what your normal is. So we designed AXON in a way that it would create essentially a baseline for each individual. And that baseline evolves with you. So at any given time when you take the test, you can get instant feedback if that test score represents something that's in your normal range or not. And we also recognize, to your second question, which is great, and it's what I was trying to highlight at the very beginning, is that this sort of cognitive function that I'm talking about, it's executive function. This is very variable. It's sensitive to many kinds of things, so it's not static. And the idea with AXON is that you can get an instant snapshot of what the brain state is in that moment. And the whole point of our research is that it's actually predictive of how you are about to do something. And that's really interesting for us. At the same time, we can track how that changes over time. So you're going to have changes that are very abrupt. You're also going to see changes that are very gradual. Kate talked about the aging population, and this is so relevant for UX research. We have to think about how cognition changing over time is going to affect people's ability to interact and perform tasks. This change is going to be gradual. Now, that's not something you're going to be able to capture in a UX study timeline, right? It's not a 1-hour measurement. But if this gains traction and people start using this on a regular basis and you track this, you can see that. I hope that somewhat answers your question.
Merci Jared. Thank you very much, Jared.
Merci beaucoup.